This is episode number 192. There's a scandal in the podcasting community, and it affects more than just podcasters. That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast. How to take your idea and make a name for yourself within your industry and beyond. Spread your message. Attract a following. Rise above the noise. Here's your host, David Hooper.
If you're a blogger, you're a podcaster, you're a YouTube celebrity, you probably had this experience. Somebody will reach out to you and want you to promote their goods and services. And this happened to me this week, somebody trying to get in touch with the Red Podcast audience, or more specifically, one half of the Red Podcast audience. This is from the email that I received. Provides a modern approach to feminine care. Products are 100% hypoallergenic cotton tampons with no additives, synthetics, chemicals, or dyes. Join the program and earn a $15 commission for every new sale that is generated through your link. So that's good for the guy who's writing me. That's good for the tampon company. They've got no risk and all reward. But this is only applicable to half the Red Podcast audience. So I thought, well, that's not the right sponsor for me. This is not a podcast just for women. I believe entrepreneurship should be for everybody, not just women, not just men, but everybody. But I thought, what would it be like if I were to cut out half my audience and talk to just one half? And here's what that would sound like.
A message for the ladies from Red Podcast.
Women of Red Podcast, come closer. David here. I'm 100% man, but I've got a mother, a sister, and a wife, so I know a little something about women. And I'm Republican, so I know about how your bodies work too. Just kidding about that. I'm actually a yellow dog Democrat, but I did subscribe to Cosmo for a year to do research on a marketing campaign I was working on, so I know enough. You're a woman on the go, and you've got shit to do. You don't have time to get sidetracked by the girl flu. Be a better entrepreneur with brand tampons. Visit .com and enter the code RED for your free trial. This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for influencers. If you're a man, you're a woman, doesn't matter. As long as you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, nonfiction author, or a business owner who wants to reach, expand, and develop your audience, that's the case. This is the podcast for you. I talk about book publishing, podcasting, speaking, and other marketing elements of your business that you must master to make a name for yourself. The focus, it's how to take your work, spread it, and make money with it. I was on Instagram a couple of days ago. Got a friend of mine that I follow on there. I'm going to call her the Mormon mother. I want to keep her anonymous. She's got a picture of her kid, and I guess the kid had tripped or fallen to the ground or something. He's got a bunch of scratches all over his face. This is actually one of the things that I love about this woman. She's got a few kids. She's Mormon, right? Stereotypical. Her kids, she lets them be kids. So sometimes that involves them falling down. Funny story. Remember Laurel? She was on the first 150 episodes. Laurel, before she was doing Pro Coach Academy, was working as a professional photographer. So we have a studio in our house. I was working on a marketing campaign. I needed some photographs of children for it. And coming from the music industry, this is a whole nother episode. I've worked with a lot of what I call momagers, a lot of the really hardcore mothers that are trying to manage their kids' career. Always a tough experience. So I called my friend, the Mormon mother. And this is great. This is lesson number 1 from this episode of the podcast. If you ever need multiple children, and you don't need a whole lot of diversity, try to find somebody with a lot of kids. So in this case, the Mormon mother had her come over, brought 3 kids, great experience, 1 model release form, 3 children, 3 different kids. Got it all done at once. It was fantastic. And as we're shooting 1 kid, the other 2 are around. And it just so happens that I've got this inversion table. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a table that you sit up on and then it flips over. Really great for your back. If you've ever been to the chiropractor, had any back issues, you might have had this recommended to you. Anyway, I've got this inversion table, and the kid is playing with the inversion table. She's flipping it back and forth, has her hands in it, pinches her hand, starts crying. The mother just rolls with it. She's tough because she understands that her kids are not fragile. They're not going to break. They're tough. She just pinched her finger. But so many times you see just the opposite of that. I've got a friend who did just the opposite. Lived in the suburbs, had her kid in like packing material, football helmet, pads on him, wouldn't let him out of the house. And even in the house was reading his email, was completely freaked out. This is a 12-year-old kid. So she's reading the kid's email, walks into his room at any time, lets the kid have absolutely no privacy because she's afraid that something is going to happen to him or he's going to get in trouble. When something happens to you and when you get in trouble, that's how you learn. That's how we as entrepreneurs build resilience. And I'm picking on parents here, but it's not just parents that treat their children like this. Men treat women like this all the time. We act like women are going to break in half. We say something to them, say the wrong thing to them, make a joke that they don't get. Women are tough, a lot tougher than men in a lot of cases. So how does this relate to your business? Well, as I mentioned, we're not exactly raising entrepreneurs by keeping everybody in some kind of bubble where the bad can't get in, where they can't fully experience the world, or trying to make decisions for those people. But the big idea for this episode is that we treat our work like these helicopter parents are treating their children. Our work is tough. Our work is resilient. We're treating it like it's breakable. We make things precious. I've been to a few podcasting events over the last year, a couple big ones, some of the smaller PodCamp type events. And one of the things that I notice in the world of podcasting, but this is the same, whether you're in the world of blogging, whether you're an author, is you will find there are people that treat their work like it's art. And I do think that it is art. There is art to it. But again, our work is very strong. My friend Derek Sivers uses the word anti-fragile. When people come and criticize it, when we have to make changes because we find holes in it, our work gets better. But if you go to these podcasting events, blogging events, author events, you find people, they make it precious. They don't want to share their work with anybody else. I've got songwriters here in Nashville. They're afraid to play their songs in a public setting because somebody's going to steal them. Well, what's the point of writing a song and saying you're a musician and saying you're a performer if you're not actually going to perform the music that you're writing? What's the point? You've got to send it out in the world and let it get criticized in order for it to be enjoyed. You've got to. You've got to take that chance. So many times book authors approach me about help with their books, help marketing. They want me to have a non-disclosure agreement before I look at their book. Never, ever do I do that. Why? First of all, because there's not an original idea out there. Nothing that you could come to me is going to be completely original. Now, you may have a different perspective on it. That makes it more original-like, but it's not original. But the big reason that I never signed those non-disclosure agreements, because if you're that worried with your idea getting out into the world, there's absolutely nothing that I can do to help you market it. We get so caught up in the way things used to be or in our own version of how things are that we don't see that other people could be doing something that's completely legitimate. As an example, there is a scandal in the podcasting world with a guy who does interviews on his podcast and is charging people $57 for this service. If you don't have a podcast, let me kind of give you a background on how it works. You've got your podcast. It goes out into the world. And even if you don't interview people, like Red Podcast, rarely ever do I interview people on this show. You get inundated by people who want to be interviewed. Sometimes they listen to your podcast. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're like the guy from the tampon company that thinks that his company, his tampon company for women, would be a good match for an entrepreneur podcast that doesn't just speak to women, but also speaks to men. So you've got wannabe guests that are trying the same thing, not doing their research and approaching you, and that is exhausting. And then, if you actually do agree to interview somebody, they call in from a coffee shop, they call in from a speakerphone, they call in from their car. They don't have the setup to get good audio that listeners deserve. So what this guy did is he started putting up a filter. Hey, are you really serious? Well, if so, $57, that's what it cost. It's not a lot of money. In my former industry, the music industry, let me tell you how it works. It's called pay to play. A club will give you a booking. They'll give you a night where you can play. And this happens all across the country, big in LA though. You buy every single ticket in advance. So if the club holds 200 people, you buy 200 tickets in advance. Let's say $5. $1,000 is what it takes to book the club for the night. And then in theory, you take those 200 tickets and you go out and you sell them for $10. You double your money. So you invest $1,000, you bring in $2,000, $1,000 profit. That doesn't always happen, but what it does do is it makes sure that the club owner is covered because he's got expenses. He's got a physical space for you to play in, and that costs money to maintain regardless of whether somebody's in there or not. Employees cost money regardless of whether they're there to serve people or just sit there all night. So put some of that work on the band. That's what this $57 guy is doing. He's putting some of the work on the guest to make sure that it's worth the guest's time and therefore worth his time to interview them. But we've made podcasting precious. Going to these events, the big ones, and also the smaller regional podcamp type events, we made it precious. There are people in there that don't want podcasting to be commercial. There are people in there that do what they call Ramblecast, where they'll basically get a digital tape recorder and just walk and talk, providing almost zero value for listeners from my experience. It's fun for the host, but not necessarily anybody would want to listen to. Yet that's what some people think podcasting should be. There are people that are frustrated about sponsorship, think there should be no sponsorship. There are people that think radio should not get involved in podcasting. And there are people that think the way they did something 10 years ago when podcasting was really starting to get traction, that's the way it needs to be done now. They made it precious. When we don't get our work out into the public, it doesn't get its chance to become better. But even if we do get our work out, we can also hold on to that attitude. And when something never gets better and it stays static, it dies. There's a saying, if you want to keep getting what you're getting, keep doing what you're doing. And that used to be true before the world was moving as quickly as it is now, before technology was in the place that it is now, where it's changing. Red Podcast, I've been producing these episodes for the last 2 years. A lot has changed in the podcasting world. Yet we've still got these people that hold on to old ideas, how things used to be, and worse, they criticize the people that are experimenting, taking chances. Sometimes what these people take chances on works, sometimes it doesn't, but at least they're taking chances. I saw an article in Huffington Post just a couple of weeks ago. It's about how to launch a podcast. Didn't read the article verbatim. I'd seen the guy around, came out about the same time that Red Podcast did. He's been around. He's been a great member of the podcasting community. I've seen him on podcasting message boards, Facebook groups, mailing list. The guy's trying. Yet everybody had a pile on saying that what he is doing, what works for him to launch a podcast is not something you should do. That's because they've made podcasting precious. I realize that you may not have a podcast, but the big takeaway here is this. Don't make your work precious. Your work needs to get out. It needs to get that criticism to become better. And if nobody hears it, what's the point? What's the point of doing the work when nobody is able to consume it? This is a whole nother thing that I didn't mean to get into. But my book, the one I talked about on the last episode, it's right now 137,500 words. It's being edited like crazy. The editor, she called it a big, jumbled mess. And it is. First drafts always suck. They always suck. How do they get better? Finding the holes and fixing them so they don't happen again. I'll be talking more about the book process as I go through it and what's happening with it on future episodes of Red Podcast. If you want to make sure that you don't miss one, redpodcast.com is how to subscribe. If you're on Android, got you covered. One-click subscribe. iPhone, one-click subscribe. However you get your podcasts, go to redpodcast.com, one-click subscribe. I've made it easy. Next episode, I'm going to be talking about a VIP party that I went to, which wasn't the VIP party that everybody else went to. If you're interested in high-end clients, if you're interested in having influence with big, important people in the marketing space, you won't want to miss it. If you've got questions, you've got comments, this podcast is anti-fragile. I love the comments. Reach out to me. At David Hooper on Twitter is the best way to do it. If you want to follow Red Podcast, at Red Podcast on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And if you like the podcast, tell a friend. I'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, the marketing podcast for influencers. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now with your iPhone, Android, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.